Greetings everyone and welcome back. My name is Alfred, and in this episode we're going to set up our user interface alongside the application for the structure. So what we are going to do in this episode, we are going to create the registration screen alongside the login screen, as well as setting up our entire application structure. So let's go ahead and start off. We'll start off by the babspec.yaml, and we're going to pull in some of the packages that we'll be using throughout the application. So here, just down the Cupertino icons, I'm going to come and paste in some of the packages that we'll be using, and we'll just go roughly each one of them. I'll start by the Gugu fonts. We'll be using the Gugu fonts throughout the application. Another package we're going to use is the Flutter table icons. I'll be using the table icons instead of the default icons. I'm also going to be using the file picker. This picker is the one we're going to use to interact with the application storage to get the images from the device, same as the image picker. It's going to be used in combination with the file picker. And another package we're going to utilize here will be the form field, and this is the field that we can use to capture the user phone number. Another package is the form validator. We'll be using the form validator to validate some of the form inputs, and we'll also be using the shared preferences. We'll be using this package to store some of the user data in our application storage. Another package is the dial. We'll be using dial to interact with our APIs. The dial, it's a wrapper on HTTP client, and this is what we be using to send a request and get responses from the API that we're going to be creating later in this course. We are also going to use the getIt or getIt package. I will be using these to create our singleton of our class instances that we'll be using throughout the application. For example, we're going to create a singleton of the shared preferences, and we're going to expose this singleton on our main file, and we'll be using that throughout the application life cycle. All right, so those are some of the packages that we are going to be creating. After that, what I'm going to do, I'm going to the lib folder here, and I'm going to create a new folder. I'll call this new folder data, and inside the data folder here, I'm going to create yet another folder, and I am going to call this folder, let me just call it endpoints. So let me go ahead and say I'll call it endpoints, and now inside the endpoints folder I'm going to have another file here, so I'll call it endpoints.dat, like that. And this endpoints.dat, it's going to be just a class that will return our endpoints. So let's go ahead and create this class. So it's going to be a very simple class, just a class with endpoints like that, and it's going to have some of the endpoints that we're going to that are going to be exposed by our API. So let's go ahead and find them right here. So we'll have one of them will be the login URL, and then we're going to have the register URL, and also we need one more that's going to be the base URL, like that. For now, what we can do, we can just say this is going to be the base URL, and we can say for now, just to have a placeholder for base API, I am going to say just localhost, and then I'm just going to keep a port here, and it's going to be authentication, just to have it as a placeholder for base URL. And for the login URL, I could just say this one will be given by I'm going to pick up the base URL, so to be base URL, and then I'm going to pass in the login file, and for that to work I'll have to end with a / there, like that. So again, for the register URL, it's going to be same, but now I'm going to change the login, and it's just going to be register like that. And just like that, now we have our endpoints that we're going to use to communicate with our backend API. Right, so after that I am going to create another folder here inside data. So now not inside the endpoint but inside the data folder. I'm going to have another folder called this folder shared preferences, and inside the shared preferences I'm going to create a file, and I'll call this file just the same. I'll call it shared preferences.dat, like that. So these shared preferences, it's just going to be a collection of some of the methods that we're going to be using as alongside the shared preference itself. So let me go ahead and bring in some of the code that we'll be using here, and this is how the shared preference is going to look. Here I have a class and I just call it shared preferences helper, and then I have one parameter here, or one property of this class, and I call it shared preferences, and that it's going to be of type shared preferences that we already installed from here. All right, and so we're going to have some of the methods here. For example, this is a feature method set, we just call it set user data. It's a map, so it's going to call this method here, and this method here, it's going to take some of the data from the logged in user, and it's going to store that in the shared preferences, and we're going to give it a key code over data. All right, and now we have another method here that is used to get the data that we already stored in shared preferences, and this method it's called get auth data. It's gonna go inside the shared preference that we already defined here and get the auth data key, which is gonna have the auth data from the user is the value of this key. All right, so another method is this one, get alert information. This is gonna be a global alert that we're going to put the value of the alert info inside the shared preferences, and here we have the opposite of the set alert info, and it's just gonna remove this information from the shared preferences. And this method here, the last method, is gonna remove the user information, that's the auth data from the shared preferences. For example, if we were to implement the logout method, then it's gonna call this remove user info, so then it removes the user information from the auth data key of the shared preferences. All right, so that's the shared preferences class, and that's how it's gonna look like. So after that, what I want to do, I am going to create another file, another folder here, and I want to create this folder now outside the data, but inside the lib folder here, I am going to call it services. Inside the services, I am going to create a file here. So I'll go ahead and create one file, and I'll call it singleton.dat. Right, and this is the singleton. This is the file that's gonna expose our singleton instances. Right, so let's go ahead and see how this file is gonna look like. So let me go ahead and bring the code for this file. So I'm gonna go ahead and paste this code here. So here we're just going to have that, and let's go ahead, and we don't need this, so let's go ahead and bring this shared preference that we just defined some moments ago. Right, and that saying screen updater shared preference. So what I can do, let me just go ahead and remove that, and go ahead and I'm just going to bring in the shared preference that we just defined, like that. And if you remember, in the shared preference folder, we have the shared preference file, and inside that we defined this class called shared preference helper. All right, and now we're going to expose this one as a singleton here. Right, so using this get it package that we installed, and we're going to expose this shared preferences helper as a singleton to our application, and every time we want to use it, it will be available for us to use. All right, okay, so let's continue. The other thing that we are going to do is that we are going to have another class, and this class I am going to put it inside the data folder. So I'll go inside the data folder here, I'll create another folder here, and I'll call it network. Inside the network folder, I'm going to create a file here, and I'll call it dial. I'll call it dial client dot. And here we're going to define our dial client, that it's going to communicate to our backend. So let me bring in the code for the dial class, and I'm gonna just bring it here. And this is the dial class, and as you can see, it's now using the get it to get the shared preference helper. And what I can do, I'm going ahead and bring in the singleton from the singleton.dat. This is a file that we created, if you can remember. And I'm also going to bring in the shared preferences as well as the dial package itself, like that. I'm going to bring in the JSON convert from the dat convert, and then I'm going to bring in the IO. After that, this class here is a class that we've not created yet, but I'm going to create it just in a moment, so don't worry about this class here. All right, so that will be our dial class, or dial client class. And here the idea is to be able to extend this class to all our interactions with the API, so that we don't keep on creating the object of the dial client every time we want to communicate to our backend, but we can just use this instance here. This instance, we're going to create it as a singleton, and then we can use that instance, the only one instance in our application, to communicate to our backend. All right, so let's go ahead and create this dial interceptor here. So inside the same folder here, I'm just gonna bring in the side like that, and here I'm going to create another file. In this file, I'm going to call it dial interceptor dot. It's gonna be dial interceptor dot. And what this is gonna do, it's gonna intercept all the communication between our application, our client application, and the backend APIs, so that in response or any error that it's being thrown from the backend, we can catch it here for all our endpoints. All right, so it is a class. It will be a class, and this class, it's gonna be the interceptor, and it extends the interceptor from dial itself. So let's go ahead and bring in the dial as well, bring in the singleton that we created, as well as the shared preferences that we just created in the other just a bit ago. And here, what I can do, I am going in and bring the convert like that, and it's our dial interceptor. So basically what happens here is that the interceptor has some overrides, and for example, we have this override on a request. If we need to add something, or we are making a request to our API, this is the time we can have it here. All right, and again on response, when we get response from our API, if we want to do something at that moment, then this is the place that we're gonna do that on when we get the response from the API. As well as on error, this is what we want to do. So here, what I'm basically doing when we get an error, I'm just reaching out and getting the response from the server, and then I'm checking the code for the response. So if I get status 4.1, for example, that will mean that we don't have authentication, so it's not allowed. Maybe for a resource that we're looking for, we cannot get it because we're not authenticated, or the authentication is required for us to be able to get the resource that we're looking for. And then I'm going to reach out and bring in the message that's coming from the server, and then I'm going to populate this map here. It's an alert, so I call it alert is of type map. It could be null or empty, as you might see. And then I'm going to set text and type. By default, the type is error, and the text, it's just an empty string. And then if I get an error here, I am going to update that map with the type will still be an error, and then the text here, it's going to be the message that's coming from the backend. Right? And when I get a 404 or not found, then I'm going to go ahead, reach out to the response, get the message, and set that to the alert map here. same as 42, I am going to reach out the errors. This 42 means there may be some validation errors, and I'm going to reach out to the errors and bring them to this text here of the alert map. You could just do a lot with this. For example, 500. If you get 500, we can just go ahead and populate the alert with the text that's coming from this server. All right, and here are the other standards checked. For example, when we get the error type being a bad response, connection timeout, and here now we're going to say that we could not connect to this server at this moment. Maybe the user might want to try at a later date. And here is a timeout. And another thing here, it's a none. For any reason that we get an unknown, we're going to reach out and just tell the user for unknown reasons that we cannot resolve the request that he was targeting. Right. So let's go ahead to the dial client and bring in the interceptor right here, like that. And that will be our dial client class set. And now we're going to instantiate this class already instantiated here in our get IT. So let's go ahead and instantiate this class that every time we want to use it, it will be there for us to use. All right. So I'll go ahead here and I'm gonna bring it in. So I'll bring the dial client from the file that we just created a moment ago. All right, and that's our setup. So what we're going to do later, we'll get this set up to our main method that it's in the main.dat, and it's gonna put up these instances or these class instances, and then we can get these instances throughout our application. So let's go ahead, and inside the data here, I'm going to create another folder, and this folder I'll call it repository. I'm just going to call it repositories, and inside the repositories I'm going to have one repository for our auth. So I'm just going to say, I'll call it auth repository .dat. And this repository is just a bunch of methods that it's going to be used to communicate your backend API. So in this repository, what I am going to do, I'm going to create a class, and then I'll have two methods inside here. For now, I'm just going to have two methods. Maybe you would want to put as many methods as you would like. And the class of repository, first of all, let's go ahead and bring in the dependency. So what I'm going to bring in is this guy here, the syncyton, and then another guy is the dial client class that we created previously, and then another thing I'm going to bring is the async, and then I'm going to bring the endpoint that we created. If you remember, we created the endpoints, and these are just URLs that are pointing back to our APIs. All right, so these are two methods that I'm going to be using. The first one is the login, and the other one will be the register methods. They're going to use the dial to post data. If we want to get data, then we'll use the get verb here instead of the post verb. Right, and that it's the repository class that it's what we're going to use to store methods that will be communicating with our backend API. So another thing I want to do, I am going here inside the lib folder, no, not inside the data, but just in the lib folder here. I'm going to create a new folder, and I will call this validation. I mistyped that, validation. And inside validation folder, I'm going to create a new file here. I'll call it validator.dat. So there it's my validator.dat, and this validator.dat, it's just going to be a class that stores some of the rules that we are going to be using to validate some of the form fields of our application, right? So as if you could remember that we have the validator here from validator, and that's what we're going to be using in this class. So let's go ahead and bring in the package validator here. And as you can see here, I have some of the rules that we're going to be using. For example, the rule for valid email, then valid password, phone number, general name, and this general name is in string name, so that's why I called it general name. And then I have required field validation, so this just for field that is required. All right, you can modify this and make it suit your requirements. All right, so that is the form validation class. So let's go ahead and create our routing logic. So again, inside the lib folder, I'm gonna create another folder here, and I'll call it navigation. And inside navigation, I'm gonna have some files here, and the first file that I'm gonna have is the router itself. It's the router itself, and what this router is gonna hold is just a navigator. So it's just gonna be very simple, and what I have to do is just go ahead and bring the material dot like that, and that is it. So here, what I'm going to do, just going to say future.delay, and I'm delaying for 0 seconds to push the user to the requested route. So here to expect the context and the route name. So as you can see, it's a named route, and I am going to navigate the user to the route that they provide through the navigator argument here, right? So another file that it's gonna be inside the navigation folder here is the routes. So I'm gonna say routes.dat, and what it's gonna be inside the routes, this will be an object containing the routes that we have in our application. So for example, right now we're going to have the login page route and the register route. So let me go ahead and bring in the material. Okay, material like that, and bring in these classes. So the first one is the login, then we have register, and finally I'm going to bring in my homepage class, right? So here I will provide the name, then it's gonna be pushed to, it's gonna instantiate the class that it's referencing to, right? Okay, so if I give in the login page, it's gonna return the login screen, and that's the route. Another file that it's gonna be here, I want to be able to slide from one route to another. So for me to be able to do that, I'm gonna create a slide here. So this slider, I'm going to call it just slide.dat. I'm going to have the classes in the slide.dat, and one class is gonna slide from right, and the other one is gonna be sliding from left. All right. So here, let me bring in the code for the slide. And as I've said, I have two classes, and the first class, as you can see, it's a slide left, and the other class should be slide right. All right, so let me go ahead and bring in the material like that, and we have our two classes right now to be used for sliding left and sliding right, as we wish our pages to animate. All right. After creating our slide classes, what I'm going to do, I'm going to the state folder, and here we already have UI provider. What I'm going to create here, I'll create another provider. I'll put it inside the auth folder, and then I'll call this auth provider. So I'm going to have a file here, and I'll call it auth_provider.dat like that. And this provider, what it's gonna hold, it's just gonna hold the data that changes mostly when we authenticate our user. All right. So let me go ahead and bring in the class auth_provider. I'll bring in the code for that, then I will explain what it's trying to do. So here, what I'm going to do, I'm going to bring in the material. And then, as you can see here, we're going to get our repository. Remember, we have our two methods residing inside the repository, the auth repository. That's the login and register methods. If we go to this repository, you can see now we have register and login methods residing here. All right, and now it's time to use our singleton instances that we created inside the singleton file that was inside the singleton. Right, so here I'm going to bring in the shared preference helper, and then I'll bring the singleton itself that it's inside the services singleton. Here you can see we registered two classes or two instances. That's the shared preference helper and the DAO client itself. All right, so let's go ahead inside our state, then auth provider here, and I'm just gonna take you through it. And what we are doing here, we are defining some data here, which is the user data map. And just another variable here, and I call it proceed. So what I do it's going inside the login screen, and then I call the author repository the login, and I pass in the data that it's passed in the login method. Here we'll see how we're going to pass in this data. We will be passing this data from our login screen. All right, so here we just get the response, and if the response is true, then we wait for the user data, and we put that inside the user data variable here, which we have it as a map. All right, so we're just gonna return false to notify the caller of this method that it wasn't successful, and we are doing the same for the register method. All right, so that is the auth provider, and as you can see here, it extends the change notifiers that whenever we change the data, we are going to notify the user that their data has been changed, and they can take effect, and it can now update their UI. All right, so that's the auth provider, and let's continue. And the next thing that I want to do, I'm going to create another folder inside my lib folder here, and I'll call this folder static. Inside the static folder, I'm going to create one file, and I'll call it loader. And this will be the loading animation when we're loading data, or we are sending a request or waiting for a response from the server. We're going to have a loading animation, and that is what we are calling here the loader.dat. So let me go in and bring in the code, the logic code for the loader, and here I'm just going to be using the stateful widget. So I'll go ahead and bring the material.dat, and I'll be using animation here, and what I'm doing is just simply offsetting the translate. So every time I change the position of the dot, so what I'm doing here, I'm just creating a dot class. As you can see here, I have a dot class, and every time I am changing the position of the dot, as you can see, it's a multiplication. So let me go ahead and bring in the math package that I'll be using in my cosine, the cos and sine for my radius. So this will be updating the radius of my dot here. All right, and then I will have some color for the dot. You could use different colors, but I just prefer to use the same color. You don't even need to every time to come here and just say theme every time. You could just go ahead here and define your color and say, for example, final color, it's gonna be something like this, and then you can go ahead and just have the color here, right? Instead of creating this one, but this one is just for demonstration purposes only, so that's why I just needed to create it everywhere, right? You could just go ahead and do it like this, but this one will still work, no problem. So I'm going to save that, and we already have our loading animation in place. So what I'm doing here after loading, I'm just going ahead and disposing it. And what I'm doing here, I'm just repeating so that it doesn't stop until we dispose it. All right. Okay, so let's go ahead. And the next what I'm going to create is the shared styles. So I'm going inside my views, then pages, and inside the pages, I'm going to create a folder here, and this folder I'm going to call it shared folder. And then after creating the shared folder, what I can do, I'm going ahead and create shared. I think we already had shared folder here. So shared, we had it already. So inside the shared folder here, what I'm going to do, I'll create another folder, and I'll call it styles. And inside styles, I am going to create one file here, and I'll just call it styles.dat. And inside the styles, what I'm going to do, I'm going to be having my commonly shared styles inside this file. So the first one that I'm going to have is the decoration, and that will be the input decoration. So let me go ahead and bring in the material, and also bring in the Google Fonts, right? And what I can have here, instead of having this one like this, I'm going to pass in here the text that it's incoming, right? So that it's my input decoration. So every time I have to use this kind of decoration in most of my form fields, then I will just go ahead and call the input decoration instead of repeating it per form input. All right, so I'll reach out to this file and get the input decoration from here. All right, and that's my input decorations. If you have some other shared styles for your widgets, you can go ahead and bring them over to this file. So the next thing that I'm going to do, I'm going to have a shared widgets file inside my shared widgets folder here. So I'll go ahead and have I'll call it shared widgets dot. Right, so every shared widget that I want to use will sit inside this file. So let me go ahead and bring in the what I have for my shared widgets, and for now I only have one widget, which is a container. And let me go ahead and bring in the material, and again bring in the Google font. We already installed the Google font package when we were starting the video, and this will be one of my shared widgets. So every time I need to have an alert container, I'm going to reach out to this widget here and then provide the message, the container color, and the text color that I want to be displayed where I am calling this alert container. Right, and so that is the my shared widgets file. If you have more shared widgets, I recommend that you bring them over to these files. There you don't have to repeat them in every file that requires that widget. So let's continue, and what I want to do now, I'll reach out to the state folder here, and inside the UI, the UI provider, I'm going to update these to have some few methods and some variables here in this class. So I'll go ahead and update this class to have some other methods like the set logged in user and then set alert. Remember this, the alert, though it's going to be global, and we also have the get logged in user, then get alert. All right, so these are the new things that we added to this class. It was already there, and I'm just going ahead and bring in the .convert. All right. Okay, so after updating that class, then what we want to do next is go ahead and update our here inside the pages, then widgets, then navbar. What I want to do is to update this part here for navbar. Right, so I'll go ahead and update this part so that we can utilize the new changes that we have already done. Right, so I'll update that, and instead of having the encode first, I'll just go ahead and bring in the new code like that. So let me see if I have this. So for now I do not have this, so I'm going to remove that, and I'll bring in so what you can do, this is just a horizontal spacer. So I'm just going to set that with width. You can just go ahead and inside the widgets, and inside the shared widget, you can just go ahead and define this as a constant, then bring it here instead of just typing it everywhere like this. This one is just for demonstration purposes, but you can just go ahead. For example, if I were to scoop this one out of here, for example, let's say this sized box with width, I could just go ahead and inside the shared widgets here, I'll go ahead and have a widget here. So widget, and I'll call it something like small horizontal width or spacer like that. And what it's gonna be, it's just going to return this like that. So it's going to return this, actually a constant, and now I can go ahead and inside my navbar here, instead of just using and repeating this one everywhere, I'll just go ahead and bring that in. So let me go ahead and bring the shared like that. I'm going to type widget, cannot be. So this one, it's expecting to be like that. Right, so instead of just repeating this one everywhere, you're just gonna define it somewhere like there we defined it, and you can just reach out to it from there and bring it in. So here what I'm doing, I'm reaching out to UI provider, and if you can remember, we have the get logged in user. It's gonna either be null or it's gonna have some data, and we're going to get the username and print it on the side, on the navbar on our application. All right, so after that we have updated our navbar, and now we can have the user being printed. And here we have also the user profile image. If at all they have some, it's gonna be also printed on the navbar of the application. So for me, I'll define some more. So let me go ahead and just bring in some more. So this one's the same as the other one, so I don't need to repeat this. So what I can do, I can remove the first one like that, and then I have the small spacer. This one will be height of the vertical spacer, and then I have a small horizontal spacer, and I have a large spacer which will be a vertical spacer. So here I have to change this one to small horizontal spacer like that. All right, so let's go ahead and now update our login screen as well as our register screens. So I'll start by the the login screen, which is this one here, and I'm just going to bring in the new code for the register screen. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to remove this method here, and here what I can do, I'm going to go ahead and bring in the one. We don't have this, we don't have that. So what I can do, I'm going to remove this, then this, then this. We're not going to use Flash in this episode. Maybe in another episode we'll be using the Flash, but not in this one. So what I can do here, I'll go ahead and bring in the helper here, and then continue until I see another problem. And what I can do here, this one, it's going to be the validator. Going to have the validator, and this one should be the validator that we defined. So I'll go ahead and just check what was the name of that class, and it's form validator, and here it should be form validator, and it's gonna be the email. So I think we called this one valid email, so it's gonna be valid email like that. So this one, it's not form fluid validator, but form validator, the one that we defined ourselves, and not the one coming from the Flutter itself. So that's gonna be the valid email that we defined in that class, as you can see here. And now what we're going to fix next will be this one here as well. So it's gonna be form validator, and this one is going to be valid password. All right, and that's all. So you can just go through the form itself and the file itself, the login file itself, and everything is gonna be clear. So here is our variables, and here it's the method that I thought we'll see later. And what happens here is, if we reach here, then it means that we are going to use the auth provider, which is this one here, and send in the form data that we define here. But before that, it means that we have to validate that form first. So we have to validate the form, and we are going to validate the form right here. So as you can see, we're going to check the form validity. If the current state of this form is valid, then we are going to go ahead and save the data, and then call the login method that is right here. All right, and here we have the definition for the toggle password, and we have the auth provider and UI provider here, and we have the email and password and error message here. All right, so let's go ahead and do the same for our register screen. So I'll go ahead and inside the auth here, we have the register screen. So let's go ahead and update also the register screen. So I'm going ahead and update the register screen. As I said, I will not be using the Flash in this application. We're going to use the custom error container, and here as well, it's form validation. I think I have to import this. No worries. I'm going up to the here. Now I don't not have this. I do not have Flash. I'm not going to be using Flash. I'm not going to be using this one. I'm not going to be using this guy, as well as this one here, but what I'll be using rather is the validation class. So I'm going to go inside the validation and I'll bring in the validation.dat. Right. So another thing is I have to bring in the shared preference helper here, and also I have to take care of the validation here, so that now that we've imported the validator, it's from validator dot and this one is valid password, like that. Right. So I think this one it's already there. So you can just go ahead and go through the file itself. I'm just gonna touch on the important things here, and some of these important things are just the properties or the variables here which are instantiated to have the default value. The information that's gonna be there by default, and then again this method here is pick gallery profile. This is going to pick the image from our phone's gallery, and another thing that's gonna happen is pick camera profile image. This one is going to launch the camera thing. You can take a picture of yourself as your profile. This one is change the password obscure, so that when we click on the eye icon, it's going to change from seeing the text, and this is going to use the profile image to make it null. So if you want to remove the image that you had already selected, this is the method that it's going to be called. All right, and here we are going to validate the form state. If it's valid, then we continue and call the user register method. Else we're just going to return false, so that we return the errors that you already have in your form. And here is the data that we're going to be using to register our user to the backend API. Right, so that it's the whole setup, and we can now go ahead and try to reload the application and see if it's still running correctly. So let me just go ahead and try to restart the application, see if everything is in order. Right, and since that we have some issues, so let's go ahead and fix the issues. The first issue that we have is the providers. So we don't have all the provider being registered, and for us to be able to solve this, what we're going to do, we're going inside the inside our state here. We have the auth and UI. This will hold the provider files, and then outside here we have the provider export. As you can see, we have the base provider, which is the UI provider, but we do not have then the auth provider that we created. So let's go ahead and bring in this provider inside this array. So I'm going to add it here and go ahead and what I can do, I'm going to, instead of that, I'm just going to have to duplicate this. So I'll save and I'll duplicate this, and instead of having the UI provider now, I'm going to have the auth provider. Like that, go ahead and bring in the auth provider from auth provider file, like that. Another thing that we are going to do, we are going to update our main.dat file. All right, so let's go ahead and update that file. I'll go ahead and open my main.dat file, which is this one here, and I'm just going to update this file. So I'm going to have to update the file, and what it's happening here, as we discussed, if you could remember, is we have this setup method inside the singleton that we created, and here we are going to use it. We're going to set it up so that we can use it. So it's like booting up these singleton instances of our classes, and then we can use it. We can use them at any time that we want to use them. All right, and here I'm just going to bring in the shared preferences. So what's happening here, and I'm just going to bring in the .dat convert. So what's happening here is that we're going to check if the user data is there. So if remember we created this file to bring in the auth data. If it's not now, then we are going to compare if the token that this user has already expired or not. If it's not expired, then we can boot and say this guy is already logged in. Else we're going to say this guy is not logged in, and we're going to pass this variable down to my app class, which is right here. All right, so it expects us to pass in the variable, which is boolean, of when the user is logged in or is not. So here you can just have this is just an idea of how you can do it. You can just go ahead, for example, if you say the user data is null, then you don't need to say else, you just can return the app. But as for me, I just put the explicitly else there instead of having the return implicitly the my app class. All right, so you can just play around here, but just be careful. This is the logic that checks if our user is already logged in or not, and this variable here, it's going to be updated according to that. So here we are going to get the status of the user, if they are logged in or not. If they are not, then what we can do here, we define a widget. I'll just call it home for now. So if the user is logged in, then I'm going to return my home page, and my home page is the class that it's going to be returned by default, right? So this is my home page there. It's going to be returned if the user is logged in. Otherwise, we're going to define a new class here, or we are going to go into the login screen so that they can go ahead and log in if they have already registered. If they've not registered, then they can go ahead and click the register button on the login screen to go to registration and register themselves. All right, so that's the logic for the login. And then what we do after we set our theme, and here I'm just setting my UI theme, and then after this I'm going to call the appropriate class, whether it's the login screen class or is my homepage class. Here is the home property of the material hub. All right, so you can just go ahead and remove this. All right, so again, I'm going to try and restart the application and see what the response will be. So that did not work correctly. I am getting this error here, no implementation for get, or it should be a problem with the shared preferences. So what I can do, I am going to just stop the application completely, and I'll say Flutter clean to clean the, not clean, but should be Flutter clean, and that should clean the project. And then what I'm going to do, I am going to run the application again. All right, I'll run the application again. And sure enough, that solved the problem. So sometimes when we will bring in the package, these shared preferences, sometimes it's about you just stop the application, then clean, and then launch the application again. And as you can see now, we have our application ready, and this will still be working fine. And as you can see now, everything is working correctly as we intend. If we click on no account yet, we should go to now this register new account. All right, and we can use the camera to take a picture from our device, or you can choose one from your gallery. All right, so and that is it for the UI of our application. In the next video, we are going now to implement our APIs, and as you can see now, the slider is working and it's sliding our route from side to side. All right. Okay, so thank you very much for being with me on this one. It's kind of a rough ride, or you can just have it as an overkill, but I just wanted to set everything correctly so that you don't get mixed up. So please let me know if you get stuck in any part of the procedure, and I will be happy to help. So thank you very much for sticking around. I'll see you in the next one, where we'll be creating the backend APIs.